We had only been in the house for 7 days when my phone rang. 7 days. Not even a full week of unpacked boxes and mismatched furniture and that particular smell new homes have, a mixture of fresh paint and someone else's years. 7 days of learning which floorboards creaked, which faucet ran cold longer than it should, which window let in the morning light at an angle that made you feel like everything was going to be fine. 7 days of convincing myself that this was the beginning of something good, something real, something that belonged to us. My wife, Claire, had been the one who fell in love with the house first. We had driven past it on a Saturday afternoon almost by accident, on our way back from her mother's place, and she had made me stop the car before I even saw the listing sign. She stood on the sidewalk with her arms crossed and her head tilted slightly to one side, the way she does when she is trying to make up her mind about something she already knows she wants, and she said, "This is it, Daniel. This is our house." I remember laughing. I remember thinking she was being impulsive, romantic, the way she always was about big things. But she was right. 3 months later, we had the keys. The previous owner was a man named Gerald Holt. We had met him twice, once at the open house and once at the closing table, where he sat across from us in a beige cardigan and signed his name with the slow, deliberate strokes of a man saying goodbye to something. He was in his late 60s, recently widowed, moving to be closer to his daughter in another state. He'd been polite and quiet and a little sad, the way people get when a chapter of their life closes all at once. We shook hands. He said he hoped we would be happy there. We thanked him. That was the last I expected to hear from Gerald Holt. So when his name came up on my phone screen on a Tuesday afternoon, the 7th day, I stared at it for a moment before answering. I was at my desk at work, half buried in project reports, and I almost let it go to voicemail. I almost did. I picked up because I thought maybe he had forgotten something in the house, a piece of mail, a forwarding issue, some mundane administrative loose end that would take 2 minutes to sort out. "Daniel," he said, and his voice was different from what I remembered, quieter, more careful, like he was measuring each word before releasing it. "I'm sorry to bother you. I know this is your time now, your home." "Gerald, hey," I said, leaning back in my chair. "No trouble at all. Everything okay?" There was a pause, not a long one, but long enough to notice. "I need to tell you something, and I want to start by apologizing. I should have taken care of this before you moved in. It completely slipped my mind during everything with the move, and I only realized it a few days ago." I assumed he was going to tell me about a plumbing issue, a warranty that needed to be transferred, something boring. "What is it?" "I had a security camera set up in the living room," he said. "Nothing invasive. I want you to understand that. My wife, my late wife, she had a fall about 2 years ago. And after that, I installed a camera in the common areas just to keep an eye on things. It was connected to my cloud account. When I moved out, I turned off the systems, disconnected the router, all of that, but I forgot about that one camera. It runs on a battery backup and connects to any open network in range. Apparently, it picked up your home Wi-Fi and started uploading again." I sat up straighter. "You have footage of our house?" I didn't realize it at first. The uploads come through automatically, and I don't always check them. But 3 days ago, I was going through my account to delete old files, and I found recent uploads, time-stamped from this past week. Another pause. "I want you to know I wasn't watching. I saw a few seconds before I realized what I was looking at, and then I stopped immediately. It's your home, your privacy. I want to delete it all, and I will. Daniel, before I do that, I think you need to know what I saw." "Before I do that, I think you need to know what I saw." There was something in the way he said that last sentence that made the back of my neck feel cold. "What do you mean? What did you see?" "I don't want to do this over the phone," he said. "Not because I'm trying to be dramatic, I promise you. It's because I'm not sure I'm interpreting it correctly, and I think you should see it for yourself and draw your own conclusions. But I need to tell you one thing first." "Okay. The footage is from last Thursday. You were at work. It was just your wife in the house, and then about an hour in, her mother and her sister arrived." He stopped. Claire's mother was Vera, a stout, sharp-eyed woman in her early 60s who wore the same 3 perfumes on rotation and had opinions about everything. Her sister was Mara, 31, 3 years younger than Claire, quieter and more watchful, the kind of person who always seemed to be listening even when they were the one talking. I had known both of them for 4 years, ever since Claire and I started dating. They were family. Strange family, but then all families are strange once you get close enough. What were they doing? I asked. Daniel, Gerald said very slowly, your wife, her mother, and her sister were doing something in your living room that I do not know how to explain. I don't want to explain it over the phone because I'm afraid if I do it will sound like less than it is, or more than it is, and either way you'll come to this with the wrong idea already in your head. I need you to see it. I could hear something in his voice that I had not expected to hear from a retired man in a beige cardigan. I could hear that he was genuinely disturbed, not excited, not curious, disturbed. Can you send me the file? I asked. I can, he said. But Daniel, I want to ask you something first. Is there any chance, and please understand I mean no disrespect to your wife, is there any chance you could come see this without mentioning it to her first, before you decide how to handle it? I did not answer right away. The request sat between us on the line like something physical. Why? I finally said. Because if I'm right about what I think I saw, he said, then she doesn't know you know, and if I'm wrong, then no harm done, you go home tonight and nothing has changed. But if you tell her before you see it, and I'm right, then whatever you might have learned by watching her reaction is gone. I'm sorry. I know how this sounds. You barely know me and I'm asking you to keep a secret from your wife. I wouldn't ask if I didn't think it mattered. I sat very still at my desk. Through the glass wall of my office, I could see my colleagues moving around the open floor, coffee cups in hand, talking, laughing, living their ordinary Tuesday afternoon. The world outside my head was completely normal. Inside my head, something had shifted, very slightly, like a plate in the earth that moves so slowly you don't feel the tremor until the walls begin to crack. I'll come tonight, I said. Gerald lived in a temporary apartment 30 minutes from our house, a furnished rental he was using until his daughter's guest room was ready. I told Claire I had to stop by a colleague's place to drop off some documents. I hated the lie the moment it left my mouth, hated the ease of it even more. She was in the kitchen when I left, standing at the stove with her back to me, stirring something in a pot, her dark hair pulled up loosely. She said, "Don't be too late," without turning around, and I said I wouldn't, and I closed the door behind me. Gerald answered on my first knock. He was smaller than I remembered, or maybe the apartment made him look that way, the low ceilings and the rented furniture and the boxes he hadn't unpacked yet. He shook my hand and led me to a small table in the kitchen where a laptop was already open, and he poured me a glass of water I didn't ask for and sat down across from me. "Before I show you," he said, "I want to reiterate that I saw a total of maybe 45 seconds before I stopped the playback. I've gone back since and watched the full relevant segment because I thought if I was going to show you, I owed it to you to at least understand what I was showing you. But I want to be honest. I still don't understand it fully. What I saw has an explanation. I'm just not sure what that explanation is." I nodded. My mouth was dry. I didn't touch the water. He turned the laptop toward me. The video was already queued up, timestamp in the corner, last Thursday, 11:47 in the morning. The living room of our house filmed from what must have been a corner shelf near the television, a low angle that captured most of the room. The image quality was good, better than I expected. I could see our furniture that we had moved in, the blue couch, the floor lamp, the unpacked boxes we still hadn't dealt with stacked along the far wall. Claire was in the frame, sitting cross-legged on the floor in front of the couch. She was wearing the gray sweatshirt she liked to wear around the house, and she had her knees drawn up slightly. She was looking at something on the floor in front of her, but from the camera angle I couldn't immediately see what. Then the front door opened and Vera came in, followed by Mara. They had let themselves in with a key. Claire had given her mother a key the first week, which I knew about, but had privately found slightly irritating. They didn't knock. Vera was carrying a large fabric tote bag, and Mara was carrying what looked like a rolled-up piece of cloth. They moved with purpose, like they had been here before and knew what needed to happen. No one looked surprised to see anyone. No greetings, no conversation, just 3 women arranging themselves in a space they clearly felt was already prepared. What happened next was what Gerald had been unable to describe on the phone. Vera set the tote bag down and began removing things from it while Mara unrolled the cloth on the floor. It was dark fabric, deep red or burgundy, and it was large, big enough for all three of them to kneel around. Claire stood up from her position and moved to one end of it. From the bag, Vera removed candles, 5 of them, white, which she placed in a loose arrangement on the cloth, and a small bowl, and what appeared to be a bundle of dried herbs in a folded piece of paper. She handled these objects with the same casual efficiency with which you might unpack groceries. They lit the candles. Claire struck the match. All 3 of them then knelt on the cloth in a rough triangle formation, facing each other across the candles in the bowl, and Vera unfolded the paper and began to read from it out loud. There was no audio. The camera uploaded video only, but I could see her lips moving, could see the rhythm of it, too deliberate and repetitive to be ordinary speech. Mara had her eyes closed. Claire was watching her mother with an expression I struggled to identify. Not fear, not boredom. Something concentrated, something serious in a way that I had never seen on her face in 4 years. Then, Vera stopped reading and set the paper down and placed her hands flat on the cloth. Claire and Mara did the same. And then they stayed like that, perfectly still, for what the timestamp told me was 11 minutes. 11 minutes of 3 women kneeling motionless around lit candles on a red cloth on the floor of my living room while I was 20 miles away reviewing supply chain reports. The video ended. Gerald closed the laptop. I sat with what I had just seen for a long moment and tried to find the rational shelf in my mind where it belonged. "Okay," I said finally. "Yeah," said Gerald. "So they were doing some kind of ritual." I said it plainly, not as a question really, just turning the thought over into words to see what it felt like. "Some kind of ceremony or spiritual practice." "That's what it looks like to me," Gerald said. "I want to be clear. I'm not the kind of person who gets easily alarmed by things like this. My wife used to burn sage. My daughter goes to a meditation group. I'm not suggesting that something supernatural was happening in your living room." He paused. "What unsettled me is something else." "The secrecy," I said. He looked at me steadily. "You didn't know about this." It was not a question, and the fact that he could tell, just from watching me watch the video, that I did not know, sat in my chest like something heavy. "No," I said, "I did not know." I drove home slowly, not because I was afraid to get there, but because I needed the drive. I needed the 20 minutes of dark highway and yellow headlights and the radio playing something I wasn't listening to. I needed that transition between the man who had just watched a video in a stranger's apartment and the man who was about to walk back into his house and lie down next to his wife. I needed to decide what kind of man I was going to be for the next little while. The kind who explodes immediately, who cannot hold a thought without releasing it, or the kind who watches, who waits, who makes sure he understands what he is actually looking at before he acts. I chose the second kind. I told myself it was patience. I told myself it was fairness, giving Claire the benefit of an explanation she hadn't had the chance to give. But honestly, part of me was also afraid. Not of Claire, not exactly. Afraid of what I might find if I started looking. Because the thing about a mystery is that it feels contained until you open it, and once you open it, it belongs to the whole room. She was already in bed when I got home, reading, her glasses perched at the end of her nose. She looked up and smiled when I came in, easy and warm, the same smile I'd fallen in love with, and she asked how it went, and I said, "Fine. Just paperwork. Boring, sorry it took so long." She said it was okay, and went back to her book. I brushed my teeth and got into bed beside her and stared at the ceiling for a long time after her breathing slowed and deepened into sleep. The red cloth, the candles, the paper with words on it, the bowl I hadn't been able to identify. 11 minutes of stillness. The way they moved, like they had done it before, like it was choreography, practiced and smooth. I thought about our relationship and tried to find the places where this could have been hiding. 4 years. We had dated for 2, been engaged for 1, married for 1. I knew her morning routines and her bad moods and the specific way she laughed too hard at her own jokes before she even finished telling them. I knew she was close with her mother and her sister, that the 3 of them had a group chat that seemed to produce a constant low buzz on her phone. I knew Vera was In her daughter's word, spiritual, that she had crystals in her bathroom and went to a monthly gathering of some women's group she never talked about in detail. I had always filed that under the general category of harmless eccentricity and left it there. I had never thought to look closer. Now I was looking closer. And the thing about looking closer at something you thought you knew is that you start to see not just what was hidden, but also all the small confirmations you had trained yourself to ignore. The next morning I watched Claire make coffee, and I watched her in a new way, the way you look at a painting after someone has pointed out a figure in the background that you had missed 100 times before. She was exactly herself, warm, a little distracted, humming something under her breath. She kissed my cheek before I left and told me to have a good day. There was nothing wrong with the surface of her at all. That was almost the problem. I called Gerald from my car, parked in the office lot, engine running. I asked him if he had seen anything else in the uploads, any other incidents, any other times they had done this. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "There's another segment. 2 days before that one, Tuesday. Same thing, except it was only your wife and her mother. About 20 minutes. Same cloth, same candles. And there's something else, Daniel. In that one, your wife was holding something. I couldn't make it out clearly, but she held it up at one point toward the end. It looked like a photograph." A photograph. "Can you send me both files?" I asked. "Already done. Check your email." I watched the Tuesday footage on my phone in the parking lot. He was right. Same ritual, fewer participants, and at approximately the 17-minute mark, Claire reached to her side and picked up a photograph that had been lying face down beside her. She held it up, both hands, arms extended slightly, in a gesture that looked almost like an offering. And I could not see the face in the photograph. I could not see anything except that it was a person, a single person, and that Claire looked at it for a long time before setting it back down. I spent the next 3 days watching and saying nothing. I became a student of small things, the way Claire reached for her phone and angled the screen away from me without seeming to realize she was doing it. The way conversations with Vera or Mara happened in the kitchen or in another room, voices dropping when I appeared in the doorway, resuming a beat too casually afterward. The way she started keeping her shoulder bag in the bedroom closet instead of by the front door, which was where she had always left it before. None of these things was conclusive. Any individual one of them was explainable, forgivable, meaningless, but they stacked up, like stones. One by one they stacked up and became a wall. On Saturday, her mother came over and they sat in the backyard while I was inside, and through the kitchen window I watched them. They were too far away for me to hear, but their body language told me something. Vera was leaning forward, both hands wrapped around her mug, and she was speaking with an urgency that I had never seen in her before. Usually she spoke the way she moved, deliberately and with a certain authority, like she was accustomed to not being interrupted. Now she looked like she was trying to convince someone of something. Claire was nodding, but her nods were small and unconvinced, and at one point she pressed both hands flat against the table, the way a person does when they are trying to anchor themselves, and she shook her head. They saw me watching through the window. Vera stopped mid-sentence. Claire looked up and smiled and waved, and then she turned back to her mother and said something short, and the conversation visibly changed. Lighter. The performance of lightness. I waved back. That night I couldn't sleep again. I lay in the dark and listened to Claire breathe and tried to assemble the pieces I had into a picture that made sense. A spiritual ritual conducted in secret in my living room. A photograph of a person I couldn't identify. A mother and daughter in an urgent, unfinished conversation. A wife who did not tell me. I kept coming back to the photograph, because the ritual, strange as it was, could be explained by many things. Claire knew I was skeptical of anything that fell under the broad umbrella of spirituality. Maybe she was embarrassed. Maybe she thought I would mock her or dismiss her. And maybe she wasn't entirely wrong about that, because if she had told me her mother was coming over to light candles on a red cloth, I probably would have found it somewhere between amusing and irritating. Maybe the secrecy was about my attitude, not about the ritual itself. That was a version of events I could live with. But a photograph of a person held up like a supplication, a focal point for whatever it was they were doing, that was harder to file away. That required a person, and a person meant a purpose. and a purpose in the context of something deliberately hidden from me opened a door I was not sure I was ready to walk through. I needed to see what was in that photograph. On Monday, while Claire was in the shower, I looked in her shoulder bag. I am not proud of this. I want to be clear that I had never done anything like it before. In 4 years of partnership, I had never gone through her things, never read her messages, never violated what I considered the basic terms of trust between two people who chose each other. I had held that line even when some small, insecure part of me occasionally wanted to cross it, because I believed that the relationship you build on surveillance is not a relationship, but a monitoring system, and I did not want to live in one of those. But I was past the point of holding lines on principle. I needed to know. The bag held the usual things: her wallet, her lip balm, her small notebook that she used for work, a folded receipt, her spare earbuds in a little case, and at the bottom, tucked under her notebook, an envelope. Just a plain white envelope, unsealed, with nothing written on it. I pulled it out and opened it. Inside was a single photograph, printed on standard paper, slightly creased at one corner as though it had been folded and unfolded several times. It was a man, late 30s or early 40s, square-jawed, dark hair, lean but broad-shouldered. He was standing outside somewhere, maybe a parking lot, squinting slightly in bright sunlight. He was not looking at the camera. He looked like someone who didn't know he was being photographed. I did not recognize him. I put the photograph back. I put the envelope back. I zipped the bag and set it exactly as I had found it, and I stood in the bedroom and listened to the water running in the shower and felt the ground beneath my feet in a way I had not felt it since I was a child. With a kind of hyper-awareness, each sensation suddenly sharp and distinct, my mind running a dozen tracks simultaneously. A man. A photograph of a man taken without his knowledge, a man she carried in her bag. I was still standing there when the water stopped. I put my phone to my ear and pretended to be on a call. Claire came out wrapped in a towel, glanced at me, went to the closet. Everything was normal. Everything was always normal when I was looking directly at it. I knew what the obvious interpretation was. I am a human being with a human mind, and the obvious interpretation arrived fully formed without my having to build it. Another man, a secret, a ritual focused on that man. The logical endpoint of these three facts was a sentence I was not ready to speak even inside my own head. But something didn't fit, and the thing that didn't fit kept nagging at me like a splinter I couldn't quite reach. The ritual. Why a ritual? If this was simply what my most frightened self wanted to reduce it to, a woman conducting an affair, then why the ceremony? Why the candles and the cloth and the mother and the sister and the 11 minutes of silence? People who are having affairs don't involve their mothers. They don't light candles in the living room. They don't hold photographs aloft like offerings to something unseen. Unless the ritual wasn't about desire. Unless it was about something else entirely. I called Gerald again on my lunch break. I asked him if he had seen anything else in the footage, anything before the Tuesday segment. He said he'd been looking, and there was one more clip from the very first day we had moved in, the day we collected the keys and brought the first load of boxes. He had almost missed it because the camera had only just reconnected to a network, and the clip was only 4 minutes long. He read me what he saw. Claire, alone. No mother, no sister. Just Claire, standing in the middle of the empty living room, looking at the walls, looking at the floor. And then she reached into her coat pocket and took out a small object he couldn't identify, and held it in both hands, and stood very still for about 90 seconds, and then put it back. She did this before we had unpacked a single box, before we had carried in a single piece of furniture. She did this on the first day, in the empty house, when she thought she was alone, when she thought no one was watching. She did this because the house mattered. The specific house. This house. I thought about the afternoon on the sidewalk when she had made me stop the car. This is it, Daniel. This is our house. She had been so certain, so immediately certain, and I had attributed it to her instinct and her romanticism and the particular way she knew her own mind. But what if she had known before we got there? What if this house had been chosen for a reason I was not part of? I needed to stop speculating and find something concrete. I needed to talk to someone who could tell me something real. and the only person I could think of who might give me something real was the one person I had been deliberately keeping out of this. Mara. Claire's sister had always been slightly easier for me to read than Claire or Vera. Not easier to know, Mara was quiet and careful and gave very little away voluntarily, but easier to read in the sense that her discomfort showed on her face in a way that Claire's didn't. When Mara was uncomfortable, she got still in a way that was itself a kind of signal, a held-breath quality that telegraphed the effort of containment. I had noticed it several times in recent days when I was around her, a stillness that hadn't been there before, and I had catalogued it without knowing what to do with it. I texted Mara on Tuesday afternoon, while Claire was at her book club. I kept it simple. Just asked if she had time to grab a coffee, said I wanted to ask her something and would appreciate keeping it between us. I stared at the 3 dots that appeared, and then disappeared twice before her reply came through. When and where? We met at a coffee shop 15 minutes from our house the following afternoon. She was already there when I arrived, wrapped in a heavy coat despite the mild weather, both hands around a mug. When I sat down, she looked at me with those still, careful eyes, and she said, "You found out something, didn't you?" It was not a question either. "Tell me about the ritual," I said. Something moved across her face, not quite guilt, not quite relief, something in between, like a door opening part way and then reconsidering. She looked down into her mug and was quiet for a long enough moment that I thought she was going to refuse. Then she said, "How much do you know?" I told her about Gerald, about the camera, about the footage I had watched, about the photograph in Claire's bag. When I mentioned the photograph, Mara closed her eyes. She kept them closed for almost 10 seconds. Then she opened them and looked at me directly and said, "The man in that photograph is named Ryan Cahill." She let the name settle. When I said nothing, she continued, "He is your wife's ex-boyfriend. They were together for 3 years. They broke up 5 years ago, about a year before she met you. He was the one who ended it. And it was bad, Daniel. Not violent, nothing like that, but psychologically it was. He did a lot of damage. He told her things about herself that she believed for a long time. Things about her worth, her intelligence, her right to be happy. She spent 2 years after that breakup rebuilding herself, and she did it mostly through her mother and through the group her mother belongs to." "The group," I said. "It's not what you're imagining," Mara said quickly. "I know what it looks like on a camera without context. I know. It's a women's spiritual group that my mother has been part of for 15 years. They have their own practices, their own rituals, none of which are harmful. When Claire was at her lowest, she joined them. It helped her. She doesn't practice regularly anymore, but she still turns to those rituals in times of stress, the way some people pray." I processed this. So the ritual in the living room was about him, about Ryan Cahill? Mara wrapped her hands tighter around her mug. "About 2 months before you moved into the house," she said, "Claire found out that Ryan Cahill had moved into your neighborhood." The floor of the coffee shop did something under my feet. Shifted. Very slightly. "Same neighborhood," I said. 4 streets over." She met my eyes. "He didn't know you were moving there. He doesn't know you exist as far as we know. It was a coincidence, a genuinely terrible coincidence. And Claire, when she found out, she didn't know what to do. She had finally closed that chapter. She was happy, actually happy, and then this." Mara shook her head. "She didn't tell you because she didn't want to burden you with her history. She didn't want you to think there was anything to worry about. She thought she could handle it herself, through the rituals, through our mother. A kind of protective prayer, a way of setting an intention, of closing a door that had been cracked open again." I sat back in my chair and looked at the ceiling and breathed out slowly through my nose. "Why the house, though?" I said. "Why this specific house?" She knew before we made an offer that he was in the neighborhood. She pushed hard for this house. "Why?" Mara hesitated for the first time since she had started talking. A real hesitation, the held breath kind, the kind that meant the next thing was harder. "Because it's closer to his address than any other house we looked at," she said quietly. I brought my eyes back to her face. "What does that mean?" "Mom believes that a protection placed at the closest available point has a stronger boundary. It's part of their practice." I don't I'm not saying this is logical, Daniel. I'm telling you what Claire believes. She chose the house partly because she wanted to put herself, her home, her life between herself and where he was. A symbolic wall. A threshold. I thought about Claire on the sidewalk. This is it. This is our house. The certainty of it. The immediate, unquestioning certainty. And I had thought she was romantic. I had thought she was following her instinct, and she had been, just not the instinct I had assumed. I drove home in silence again. Same highway, same dark, same headlights. But it felt different. The mystery I had been carrying for almost 2 weeks was not the mystery I had thought it was. No other man in the sense I had feared. No betrayal of that particular kind. Just a woman with a wound who had found an unusual way of protecting it, and who had not yet found the words to tell her husband that the neighborhood he thought was just their neighborhood also contained a ghost she'd been trying to outrun for 5 years. I should have felt relieved. I mostly did. But there was a layer underneath the relief that I had not anticipated, something complicated and uncomfortable, because the secrecy had been real even if the cause was different from what I had imagined. She had chosen the house and not told me why. She had conducted rituals in the living room and not told me why. She had been carrying a photograph of a man in her bag and not told me why. These were not nothing. These were gaps in the picture I had of us, and even when I filled them in with the true explanation, the gaps themselves remained. I walked into our house. Claire was in the kitchen, making dinner, and she turned when she heard me and smiled. I looked at her and I saw, for the first time very clearly, something I thought I should have seen long ago, the labor behind the smile. The effort of carrying something heavy while appearing to carry nothing at all. I had admired that quality in her, her composure, her steadiness, the way she seemed to navigate difficulty without broadcasting it. I had read it as strength. Now I understood it was also, at least in part, a kind of loneliness. I sat down at the kitchen table. She asked how my day was. I said fine and asked about hers. She said the book club was good. She stirred the pot, the domestic rhythm of an evening at home. Claire, I said. She turned and looked at me. Something in my voice had been different, just barely, just enough. I need to talk to you about something. She set the spoon down slowly. The color in her face shifted slightly, not dramatically, just a recalibration. Her eyes went somewhere carefully neutral. Okay, she said. I told her about Gerald's call, about the camera, the footage, the trips to his apartment. I told her I had watched the videos. I watched her face as I said each thing, and I saw, in that face I had studied for 4 years, a sequence of emotions that arrived and were contained and arrived again, and beneath them all, clearly, plainly, the specific exhaustion of a secret that has been held for too long and finally doesn't have to be held anymore. When I finished, she stood with her hands flat on the counter, head slightly bowed. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I'm sorry. I should have told you." "You should have," I agreed. I kept telling myself I would after we were settled. After I felt more, I kept moving the goalposts. She looked up at me and her eyes were bright and she was clearly fighting very hard to hold her expression still. "It wasn't about not trusting you. I want you to understand that. I didn't tell you about Ryan because I didn't want it to be something we had to carry together. He took enough from me. I didn't want him to take anything from us." "I understand that," I said. "I do. But the choice about what we carry together isn't yours to make alone." She nodded, a small, real nod, the kind without performance in it. "Tell me about him," I said, not with anger, just with the kind of open steadiness I wanted to offer her, the thing I hoped she had been afraid to ask for. "All of it. Start from the beginning." And she did. She talked for a long time, longer than I expected, because it turned out the story was longer and more layered than even Mara had summarized. Ryan Cahill had not simply ended a relationship badly. He had spent 3 years systematically dismantling Claire's sense of herself, with a precision and a patience that, described in full, was genuinely chilling. Not with cruelty, but with something more insidious, with redefinition. "You're not really like other people, Claire. You see that, don't you? You need more than they do. You're too much for most people. You understand what we have isn't something ordinary people could manage. Small corrosions, applied consistently, over years. By the time he ended it, she had been so thoroughly reshaped by his language that she barely recognized herself. It had taken 2 years, and her mother and her sister, and a community of women who practiced an old, particular kind of self-reclamation to rebuild what he had taken down. When she found out he had moved 4 streets from the neighborhood, she and I had already half decided to look in. She had not panicked. She had made a plan. The plan was, by most rational measures, unusual. But it was the plan her tools allowed her to make, and it had given her back a feeling of agency at a moment when she had been afraid of losing it again. She had not told me because she had thought it would be too much to explain, because she didn't know how to give me the full context without also giving me the years of pain, and the years of pain were hers, and she had not been ready to hand them over. When she finished talking, it was late. The pot had been taken off the heat. We were both sitting at the kitchen table, facing each other, and the house around us was very quiet. "I need to know one more thing," I said. She waited. "The house. You chose it partly because of where it was relative to his address. That's what Mara said." I watched her face. "And I need you to decide right now, in this conversation tonight, whether you're going to confirm that or tell me it's not true." She held my gaze, and she did not flinch, and she said, "It's true." I nodded slowly. "I needed to feel like I was facing him," she said, "not running. I'd spent years running, even without knowing it. Choosing this house was the first thing I had done that felt like I was standing still, on my own terms, with my life around me." She gestured at the kitchen, at the house. Our life. I wanted our life to be the thing between me and him. I didn't want to explain that because I was afraid it would sound like I was still, like he still mattered to me in the wrong way. He doesn't. Not like that. But he matters in the way that damage matters. You don't stop carrying a scar just because the wound has healed. I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, "I know something about that." And I told her about my father. Until one day, the space where he had been was simply empty, and he was in another city with another life. And I was a child standing in a house wondering what I had done to deserve the silence. I had never talked about it fully, not even with Claire, for almost exactly the same reason she had held her own story back. Because it was mine. Because handing it over felt like losing something. Because I thought love was supposed to be the place where you put your whole self forward, and not the evidence of everything that had been done to it. We sat at that kitchen table until after midnight. There is a moment in some conversations where the thing that has been between two people, the unnamed thing, the invisible weight, becomes visible. Not solved, not removed, but seen. And the seeing of it changes the weight of it in a way that is hard to describe without sounding smaller than it is. It is not that the thing disappears, it is that it becomes shared. And shared weight is not lighter exactly, but it is different. It is less lonely. That was the night we learned how to talk to each other in a new way. Not an easier way, harder in some respects, more exposed, but real in the way that things are real when you have stopped arranging them. I called Gerald the next morning and thanked him. He said he was glad it had worked out and that he was deleting the files and didn't ask any questions, which I appreciated. I thought about what a decent thing that was, to call a stranger and tell him something uncomfortable, and then not ask anything in return. A week later, on a Friday evening, Claire and I walked 4 streets over. We didn't plan it exactly. It emerged from a conversation, from the shared decision that the boundary you name is a boundary you have some control over, and that walking past a ghost is different from being haunted by one. We held hands and walked the neighborhood in the early evening, and we found the building where Ryan Cahill's apartment was listed, and we stood on the sidewalk across the street for about 30 seconds and looked at it. It was completely unremarkable. A beige apartment building with a parking lot and a row of dying shrubs along the front. Nothing about it was threatening or portentous or charged. It was just a building where a man lived, a man who did not know we were standing across from him and probably would not have recognized Claire if he had. People who do damage often forget the damage they've done. That is part of why it is damage. "Okay," Claire said. "Okay," I agreed. We walked home. I never told her about the fear I had carried for those 2 weeks, the particular specific fear about what the photograph might mean, the version of events my worst imagination had constructed. She didn't need to carry that. Some things belong to the person who feared them and nowhere else. What I learned from that entire strange month, from the camera in the corner and the man in the beige cardigan and the footage I watched on a small screen in a rented apartment, is that you can live alongside someone and not know their whole geography. You can love a person for years and still find entire rooms in them that no one has entered. This is not a failure. This is what people are. Rooms within rooms, some of them locked for good reasons, some of them waiting for the right moment, the right combination of trust and courage and exhaustion to open. The house stopped feeling like a house with a secret in it. It started feeling like what it was always meant to be, what Claire had seen in it from the sidewalk on that Saturday afternoon before I had any idea what she was seeing. It started feeling like ours, like a place where two people with scars and rooms and complicated histories had decided deliberately, imperfectly, and with a great deal of love, to build something that was larger than either of them. I think about Gerald sometimes, and the coincidence of that forgotten camera, the battery backup that connected to our Wi-Fi and uploaded to a cloud account, and sent a retired widower scrolling through footage he was not expecting to find. 1 degree of difference, and none of it would have opened. We would have gone on living side by side with our respective weights, politely not asking, politely not telling, assembling a shared life on the surface of things kept separate. But that is not what happened. What happened was a phone call on a Tuesday afternoon, and a man who said, "Don't tell your wife, come alone," and the slow, excruciating, ultimately necessary process of finding out that the thing you were afraid of was not the thing that was true, and that the thing that was actually true was something you could have borne all along if only you had known how to ask for it. The red cloth is in a box in the back of the closet now. Claire told me about it one night, casually, handing me something that had been held in secret for a long time. She said her mother gave it to her years ago. She uses it sometimes when she is afraid, and needs to feel like she is doing something with the fear rather than just absorbing it. She told me she was sorry she had felt she couldn't tell me. I told her I understood it better than she might think. I keep the photograph of Ryan Cahill in my mind sometimes, that unremarkable face squinting in sunlight, not with anger, just as a reminder. A reminder that the people we love are full of history we were not present for, history that shaped the person we found, and that knowing someone is not a destination you arrive at, but a direction you keep moving in, slowly, with patience, with the willingness to be surprised. The living room is exactly that now. A living room. Couch, lamp, boxes finally unpacked, windows that let in the morning light at an angle that makes you feel like everything is going to be fine, not because everything is perfect, because it is real, because we are in it together, because the walls hold only what we have put there. I think that is enough. I think that is more than enough. I think that is everything.